Hello, everybody. Welcome to the seminar for Land and Atmospheric Science. I'm David Mulla, and I'm going to introduce our speaker today, who is a good colleague of mine and the Institute for Artificial Intelligence on Land, Economy, Agriculture, and Forestry. And he's Yao-Yi Chiang is a associate professor in the Department of Computer Science. And he did his PhD at USC, where he was a professor before coming here. He's a fellow of the Institute on the Environment, and he's a specialist in artificial intelligence or spatial artificial intelligence. So the application of artificial intelligence in the context of spatially varying properties. Done a lot of work on modeling traffic patterns in Southern California, air pollution in Southern California as it relates to its spatial location with regards to freeways. And now here he's going to be talking about his research on spatial AI applied to mapping permafrost in Alaska in conjunction with Nick Jelinski. So welcome.
All right. Thank you, David. Very happy to be here. Just like what David said, I was at the University of Southern California for many years. I was in the Spatial Sciences Institute. So my background is a mix of GI science, geospatial, geographic information systems, science, and machine learning, data mining. So I joined the department, computer science and engineering 4 years ago, 4 winters so far. Very happy. And today we are going to talk about what we have been working on for over a year on fine-scale soil mapping in Alaska with machine learning. I have to start by saying that this work is from our wonderful students in computer science, Larissa Chen and Yijun Lin. And also, we cannot do this work without soil scientists. So Nick Jelinski is actually a very strong pusher of this work. Okay, so, and we just got the paper accepted to SIG Spatial this year. That's the paper title. SIG Spatial will be in town in November, first week in November. There will be a lot of interesting papers on how you use AI, machine learning, computer science techniques applied to different disciplines. So you might want to check it out. All right, so I will begin by talking about the problem that we are solving. So we are looking at US digital soil mapping data. For the US national and local scale product, they are available, but mainly focus on the continental US. On the right side, you can see maps of the US and Alaska. 80% of the unmapped lands in the US are actually in Alaska. For Alaska contains the vast majority of the US permafrost. Melting permafrost can threaten overlaying infrastructures. I think everybody knows this. I learned about this when I started to work on the project. So that's the nice thing about working with scientists. So soil properties and permafrost. We are looking at the Alaska Soil Data Bank, and you can see on the right side, these are field observations, the red dots. And one thing that you would notice is all these dots are fairly sparse compared to the entire region of Alaska, and it's unevenly distributed, which means for some locations, you might have a lot of them, but for the majority of Alaska, you don't have any observations. And there are 2 attributes, soil properties, we want to be able to predict when there is no field observation. So the first one is the near surface permafrost. It's smaller than 1 meter from the surface. And also soil type classification. And we are focusing on a few types for the last year. So what are the challenges? In machine learning or any AI models, typically there is a way called supervised models, which means you show the machine, you build the model first, and in a data-driven method, you show the model lots of samples. You say, if you see something like this, you could predict it like that. For example, you show the model lots of images of dogs and you give it the label, say dog, it will be able to predict dog when an unseen image show up. But in our case, the challenge is the field observations, they are spatially biased. That means, so we are using this spatially biased term pretty freely. And in this case, we are saying that there are some locations you do have observations, other locations, most of the locations you don't. And they are sparsely distributed. That means you don't have a lot of training data to train your machine learning model. And soil attributes may depend on different covariates to varying degree at different locations. That's what we call spatial varying modeling. So I don't know if everybody here knows spatial varying modeling. So which usually in the term means when, let's say I build a machine learning model that I will be able to, the model will be able to look at satellite imagery and predict the population, okay? And I build a model, use US population data, US satellite imagery. Now the question is, can I use the same trend model in France? Maybe. Can I use it in India? Probably very difficult, right? So that's spatial varying because the model needs to learn the dependency between the covariate. In that example, the covariate would be the satellite imagery to predict something population, right? So here we are looking at predicting near surface permafrost and soil types using satellite imagery and other data, available data for Alaska. And we want to be able to capture this type of spatial varying property for different locations in Alaska. So our goal is also to do a fine scale soil mapping. By fine scale, we are producing 10 meter by 10 meter spatial resolution of soil property. And what the training data we have are the point measurement from field survey from the year 1957 to 2023 collected in the Alaska Soil Database. And Nick was organizing, is organizing, harmonizing the data set. Okay. So on the right side, you can see that our targeted model maps, and that's one of the previous work generated this map. And the bottom ones are what we call multimodal data because they are all from different types of sensors or measurements or surveys. And we are looking at the type of data that are able to cover the entire Alaska as our covariate. And in this case, we are using Sentinel-2. I think we have near infrared and the other wave. So everything we can get from satellite imagery. And I believe this is 10 meter. Yeah, this is 10 meter by 10 meter per pixel. We also have DEM, digital elevation data. This we have much finer spatial scale. I think we have 5 meter by 5 meter, but we are using derivatives like aspect, slope. We take those and do the calculation and generate the derivatives. We also have weather data. Weather data is much more coarse because you would imagine weather within 20 meters probably do not change much. So the original measurement, I think this one gives us 80 kilometer by 80 kilometer. And before we start training the machine learning model, we uniform them all to the 10 meter by 10 meter pixel resolution. So 10 meter by 10 meter. 5 meter by 5 meter. So we just upsampling and downsampling. Well, depends on which discipline you are. Sometimes people say upsampling, sometimes people say downsampling. But we unify, we generate a 10 meter by 10 meter from this one, 10 meter by 10 meter for this one. Okay. That's actually a current limitation. I'll talk about it, but that's what we do right now. All right. So let's look at some existing work in soil mapping. Existing soil product, for example, the Alaska State Soil Geographic Database. This is a statewide soil resource, but it's pretty coarse. An individual map unit can span tens of thousands of kilometers, and that unit could cover a variety of soil types. So it's too coarse. The second one is the Gridded National Soil Survey geographic database, derived from this the first product. It has 10-meter resolution, but does not really have true spatial detail. So this product is pretty much an interpolation of all the data points they know. So it's pretty smooth, but we actually are looking for spatial details. So what are the existing approaches that can help us generate a product like this? The first type of approaches is process-based approach. We call this process-based because some scientists, soil scientists, needs to come in and define equations, different properties that will be able to say, hey, if you see this soil type, it must be coming from something. And what is that something? What are the equations that we can write? So pretty much like a simulation. Requires lots of domain knowledge and usually apply to a smaller area because that domain knowledge might be different from one area to another and will require higher computational cost to do the process. Machine learning approaches, a typical one that people used, like in this paper, I think Nick is also one of the co-author on this paper. So this is the statewide map, and this is for Alaska, 30-meter resolution, and they are integrating topographic and climate covariate, use random forest to do a prediction. So our work is in this category, the machine learning category. Our novelty or the way that we are looking at the data is instead of simply combine this covariate and ask the machine to figure out, can we have a better approach that we will be able to combine different types of covariate and have the machine figure out how to combine them, how to fuse them, how to do the prediction for soil properties. So for example, there are 4 common ways I listed here on fusing different types of covariate. The first one is feature level fusion. It's the simple way that people would usually do. For example, we will take the topographic information, the DEM derivatives, and take the climate covariate and generate a feature vector, just describe them. Right now you have something that you can describe a piece of land. Then you train the machine learning model to look at that and generate a prediction. Or we can do cross-model attention, which means we can send all this covariate to a machine learning model to say, help me find the most relevant information and filter out the noise. This is usually used if you ever use a language model, ChatGPT. It's lots of attention type of fusion. Contrastive learning is also one type of machine learning approach, which usually work on multimodal data. If you ever use an AI model that will look at the image and generate text that describe that image, that's contrastive learning, which means it's training that model to say, hey, if you see this text and you see this image, treat them as the same thing, right? So that's the contrastive part. All right, so our approach will have some interesting thing there that I'm going to show you, but let's look at the challenges I just talked about before. So the first one is sparse ground truth. How do we mitigate this spatial bias in the training data? The second challenge is multimodal modeling. How do we take advantage of multiple data sources? Sometimes when you have too many data sources, the machine will get confused. So we want to be able to help the machine to train the machine so that it will be able to get the relevant information out. Our method is called MiSo, Multimodal ML for fine-scale soil mapping. And in our approach, we have a few components. The first component is what we call a geospatial foundation model, backbone. We call it backbone because we reuse somebody else's geospatial foundation model. So this is a computer vision model. So computer vision is the field that working on automating image understandings, right? Image, there's an image, there's a dog in the image, there are 2 cats in the image. And in recent years, people started to look at all the satellite imagery, other types of remote sensing data. And you can see this is from NASA. So what they do is they build this thing called geospatial foundation model. I think Google has one, Meta has one, Oak Ridge National Lab has one. So many people are building this, especially when they have good computational resources. So they just take all this large data set and they build a machine learning model saying that if you see something like this, would you be able to guess the other modality of the same location, right? And the model doesn't really care about what type of modality, you just feed it a lot of data set. The goal is to be able to say, now I have a trend model. When the model look at the satellite imagery or a DEM, it will be able to find interesting location. So by interesting location, this means something that will be relevant to some task. Nobody knows what the task would be because it's foundation model. It doesn't really know any task. So you can think of it as a filter that will be able to take a satellite imagery, get some useful signature out so that we can work on it. The second component is what we call an implicit image function. And this technique allows us to do continuous spatial prediction across the entire Alaska instead of using a predefined resolution. And that's the component that allows us to do very fine scale prediction. So this is the technique people usually do in computer vision. Here I'm showing you one example. This is called super resolution. If you have an iPhone or a Google Pixel, they will show you how great the camera is by zoom into like a faraway place, right? And they will say there is an optical zoom to 5 times optical zoom, but you can actually zoom into 10 times. So what happened there? If it was 10 years ago, it's just interpolation. So that 10 times zoom in will be pixelated. Doesn't look very well. But today there is something called implicit image function that will be able to look at a low resolution image and a high resolution image pairs and trying to figure out the linear relationships between pixels here. And when it starts to look at lots and lots of images like coarse version and fine scale version, you will be able to take something like this and generate a really fine super resolution image. So this is what I got from a paper. This is a real experiment. It's quite amazing when you see they can do from a very small image and generate very high resolution ones. But it's not magic. That model has seen a lot of data, so it knows if you have something coarse like that, how should I generate a very detailed ones? So that's the power of this implicit image function. All right, so I told you about this geospatial foundation model, the implicit image function. The last step is this contrastive learning procedure that would be able to fuse all kinds of modality together and help to raise the geolocation awareness in the model. And I'm going to talk about each of these modules. All right, so on the right side, that's our architecture. So what you can see here, the top part are the input data, the bottom part are the feature vectors that we will generate for each 10 by 10, 10 meter by 10 meter area for prediction. So if you ignore everything here, you can actually take this generated once to use a random forest or any linear regression even to do a prediction, because this is already a feature vector that describes 10 by 10 square. Okay, so starting from the top, we have multispectral satellite imagery, we have other covariate like DEM and weather. And for the model to use them, we have this geospatial foundation model, and this is pre-trained. So this pre-trained model has seen lots of satellite imagery and other location dataset, raster dataset already. So it knows how to get useful information out from satellite imagery and remote sense data. For other types of covariates like weather, DEM, because it's not pre-trained in those models, so we train a similar transformer architecture from scratch to extract relevant information. So you can think of these two are the same, but based on different types, we choose different ways to extract relevant information for prediction. And if you look at this layer, all those cubes are features. So two vision encoders to encode these modalities into multi-scale image features. So we use this pre-trained geospatial foundation model for satellite imagery. So SATLAS is the model that we use. We try different models, and this one works the best at extracting the good features for soil type prediction. Okay, so now I want to tell you what it means by multi-scale image features. So if you look at this, remember I told you this has its original spatial scale. And the encoder actually generates lots of cubes. Each cube, the depth represent the features that can describe a location, a grid cell. And here, a grid cell would have very spatial resolution at different level. For example, this one is, I think this one, if I remember correctly, this one is 256 grid by 256 grid, representing the entire image. And this one will be 16 by 16. So this means the smaller one, coarse ones, is actually aggregated aggregated image features from this one. But we want to make sure that the model will be able to see image features at different levels. So the encoder will generate different levels of spatial resolution image features. And the same here as well. So now, so far with these two encoders, we have lots of features that we can use. The next step is use our implicit image function to help us identify what exactly is the features we need. So at each scale, our model will learn a continuous function to combine all these image features from the encoder to generate something that will be able to represent a location. For example, let's say we have a field observation at this location. Right, and this location does not have to be at a grid center of your satellite imagery, right? You cannot control that. It can be a random location that's at the corner of a grid. So to compensate that, for example, let's say this is your field survey location. Here are 4 grids. And these grids can be from any of the spatial scales, because for each scale, we are going to learn this function once. So let's say this is from the most detailed scale here. So this one is the image feature at the finest scale learned from the GeoFoundation model for this image patch. This one represent here, this one represent here, this one represent here. And I have a field survey location here. What I'm doing here is I told the model, say, hey, look at all your neighbors. Based on your distance to them and your orientation, help me learn a function that I can combine these 4 features to represent you. If you do a very simple spatial interpolation, this one will be like weighted sum or weighted average based on the distance, right? But in our case, we want the model to learn this function because maybe it could be that this is the elevation of this point is very, very high. So the model says, oh, this is very high. So although it's far away, I want to use this information. I want to have this z value combined into me because it will affect me because this is high elevation. Okay, so once we can learn that function, that means we can start to generate all kinds of satellite embeddings and all these covariate embeddings from the features extracted from the implicit image function, and then we can sum them together. But before we sum them together, we do a contrastive learning. So the contrastive learning in this case is helping to say, if these two embeddings are at the same location, we want them to be very similar. So these embeddings are the feature vectors we just generated. The goal for the contrastive learning is to be able to get out the shared information between all these modalities and remove the irrelevant information. One other thing we did was we use query location. So by query location, I mean the location that, for example, when we have field survey data. So when we have field survey data, it will have a latitude and longitude. We build an encoder to encode the latitude, longitude, generate some embeddings to represent the location. So we can think of this as a feature vector representing the location. If two locations are close, the embeddings will be close. If they are far away, the embedding will be far away. We do another contrastive learning between this final embedding that we sum up here to the geospatial embedding. This one is pretty critical because this is saying that if two locations are nearby, we want them to have similar embeddings or similar environment covariate that are relevant to soil quality. So with that, I'm going to show you our experiment. So with all this satellite imagery, all these modules, now we have an embedding that will be able to represent each grid. Then we can do the prediction by taking that embedding, run a random forest, or in our case, we train an end-to-end model. That means we have some deep learning components after the embedding to make the prediction. So these are all our inputs: satellite imagery, multiple bands, DEM data, derivatives, and climate data. Our output, so we have two tasks. The first one is NSP prediction. This is the binary classification. Either there is 1, you have permafrost, or 0, you don't. And we have soil type classification. We have 7 classes. And the way we are conducting the experiment, we have 3 settings. The first setting is random, which means we take available field observation. We randomly select 80% of them for training, 10% for validating the model, another 10% for testing, so random. The second and third one are spatial holdouts, which means we look at spatial groups and we say 80% of the spatial groups we are going to use for training, 10% for validation, another 10% for testing. And here we do another spatial holdout with 10 kilometers, which means observations are within 10 kilometers will be in the same group. So why are we doing this? So if you look at here, which one would you think would be easier for the model to do? Random. And this is because if you take, for example, let's say the blue are training, the red are testing, right? And for every red, you have higher probability to find some blue nearby, right? And with spatial autocorrelation, the model will be able to use this to guess for this more easily compared to these 2 settings. This is the most difficult because we are going to use, say, for example, all the field survey here to train and test if the model will be able to generalize to the data points that are far away, 10 kilometers away. So these settings actually help us understand the spatial the model's capability to handle spatial variability and to be able to look at the result in a more interesting way. All right, so these are 3 groups of data split, and we compare our model with random forest. And we have all the measures here. This is for NSP prediction, so it's binary. And this is precision recall for 0, no permafrost. This is precision recall for class 1, yes, permafrost. This is the overall accuracy. And the key points here is you can see our result did pretty well in accuracy. I think for these 2 classes, random forest still perform better, 2% better than our approach. But if you look at and I will tell you why. That's the most interesting part. But if you look at this recall for one, there is permafrost. Our recall is much better than random forest across all settings. Would you be able to guess why? What's happening here?
There's a feature in the covariates that is linked to permafrost that the random forest can't identify.
No.
Sounded good, right?
It's the class imbalance. So the model actually see a lot of zeros. Random forest see a lot of zeros. Our model see a lot of zeros. So random forests tend to predict the one that has lots labels. And in this case, random forests tend to predict a lot of zeros. So the accuracy for the locations that we tested will be higher. And if you look at recall for zeros, for example, random forest is much higher. Because if you guess everything zero, you're going to have very high recall, but then you are going to have a lower precision. So this is a class imbalance problem. But it's quite interesting to see if you have different classes, how a different machine learning model would be able to deal with them and the result. And if we look closely, this is satellite imagery. Let's focus on those two areas. And you can see this is random forest, that's MiSo. And you can actually see a random forest and MiSo predict very well using the river as boundary. But just, for example, look at this area. Random forest predict this area very similarly. This is the probability of seeing the permafrost. But if you look at MiSo, there are lots more spatial details in that region. And the same for that one too. So Nick pointed us out, he pretty much guided us on how we should look at the data set at different locations and look at different properties of the data. The next one I want to show you is the classification prediction. So in general, MiSo outperform random forest, and the darker colors are MiSo, the lighter colors are random forest, and different color shows you different spatial split. The green ones are random forest. This orange one are 1 kilometer spatial holdout. Blue ones are 10 kilometers spatial holdout. Yeah, so you can see we outperform random forest on this aggregated measurement. But the interesting thing is actually looking at the prediction result, because the accuracy number that we can generate here, we can only evaluate for the locations that we have field observations, right? But the whole purpose of doing this is to be able to do accurate prediction for the location that we do not have field observations. So we are working with Nick to look at the predictions. So one thing that's interesting here is you can see on the left side, random forest will have pretty homogeneous type of prediction, but on the right side, the MiSo prediction actually highlight this area, but not this place. Right? So this could also provide some guidance on future field survey locations. Maybe this will be an interesting location to have one sample and see what would the sample be and how it would be able to help the model. The last one, we also look at this, we call it spatial analysis by this major land resource areas. This is a framework that divides geographical regions into subregions. And we did this for bird species modeling for the entire US with other types of ecoregions as well. So we think this might be useful to look at different regions and the prediction result at different regions. So on the left side, these are the prediction accuracy for classification for each region. And you can see MiSo generally outperform random forest in every region. But what's also interesting is if you look at that one, this is the ground truth. And this is MiSo prediction, and this is random forest prediction, and the y-axis are the point count. So one thing I want to show you here is this one is highly skewed for this class, right? In the ground truth, we have lots of ground truth here. And you can see when you have lots of ground truth here, random forest just went really wild on predicting this class because it sees a lot of them. And MiSo also generated a lot of them, but not as many as this. So that's something that we are looking into to see the bias of all these different models at different locations. So this is my last slide. Today I show you our work MiSo. This is a collaboration between soil sciences and computer science. A model that utilizes this geospatial foundation model and this superpixel implicit image functions for soil mapping from sparse field observations and multimodal data. We did one of the contribution is we did this comparison between random forest and MiSo to be able to understand the bias of the model, the data set, and the result. And now we have Nick. So if you have any questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Yao-Yi. My question is about the extra information in the MiSo method. You had weather data and you had digital elevation models. Were those variables also in the random forest model?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, they were the same covariates.
They were the same covariate, okay. So,
Even the derivatives are the same process, yeah.
so you had, so both models were basically trained on similar covariates.
Yeah, the
That was
same.
I wasn't sure whether
But for
that could explain some of the differences in performance, but it sounds like it doesn't.
yeah, but for random forest, it's looking at each grid cell and predicted and trend prediction independently from other grid cells. Right?
And was there any extra explainability in random forest that you didn't see in MiSo? In other words, could you like figure out what factors were really associated with permafrost in random forest, whereas maybe you couldn't do that with MiSo?
Yeah, I would say MiSo is much more difficult to explain compared to random forest. But there are some ways that we can look into the image features and what exactly are generated here to be able to explain. But naturally, it's much more difficult than random forest.
And did you use any other embeddings like alpha in Google?
We try other pre-trained models. I don't know if our student try alpha, but I know we tried a couple ones, and this one gave us the best result. So it really depends on how the model were, the geospatial foundation model were pre-trained and what type of data set they see.
Nick, I got a question for the speaker. This is Satish Gupta. Very nice presentation. I'm not sure I understood everything or most of it. I've read some papers where they talk about random forest models, and I got two questions. Could you again explain, if you already done it, what's a random forest model? And the second part would be, where do you bring in the physics? I mean, it seems like, at least to a person who doesn't understand AI, there's more of a empiricism coming. You're correlating one against the other, and based on that, we're trying to see if we can predict something. Is that right understanding of AI as I understand it? Go ahead. You answer the questions.
First, I can start and then Yao-Yi can correct me when I'm wrong. Well, I mean, random forest essentially is just making decision trees, but you're making many of them. And so based on the covariate, the environmental covariates that you have, And as Yao-Yi said, it's a pixel by pixel, so independent of the neighborhood. Some of the other types of models, like the MiSo model, is much more contextual. You know, it's taking into account much more than just a single pixel and what's there. But in terms of the where does the physics come in? I think it's a really good question. It's a really good point. I think it's something that, you know, a lot of folks are working on with this particular project and this particular data set. There's opportunities right now, and I don't know, I apologize, I was teaching, I missed the first part of Yao-Yi's presentation, but right now the problem in Alaska and in many permafrost regions is that there is just not good spatial information at all on permafrost distribution and soil characteristics. It's very poor. It's the place in the United States where we have the least environmental information in terms of from a soils perspective. And it's also a place where there's a lot of demand because of villages that are quite literally having to come up with relocation plans in the next 5 or 10 years because of permafrost degradation. And so the current focus that we've had that, you know, I think Yao-Yi's been presenting has been just to produce static maps, and they are by nature, because of the nature of the models, they are not guided by physics in any way. It's purely looking at the environmental covariates and then the point data sets and making predictions based on those. However, I think the next step, and I think something that people are really excited about, is we're basically treating all of this as a single time point. These are static predictions. And I think where there's a lot of really interesting new work to be done, and hopefully somebody that David and I have nominated for adjunct status in our department, Neil Pastic, who's with USGS, he's going to come in December to give a seminar. But I think where we need to go is integrating a temporal component, and then we can pull in a lot of more of a sort of knowledge guided or physics guided, because there's really good models. There's really good numerical models of heat transfer. If we can, you know, parameterize some of these things through our static representations of how thick is the organic materials at every pixel, what's the soil texture. And once you start to have those in a static representation, then all of a sudden you can bring in numerical models and run things in the future using or retrospectively using climate data that's, you know, going forward or backwards. And so that's what people are really even more interested in, because all of a sudden these become a lot more predictive and there's a lot more power in what can be done with them right now. And again, I apologize, I missed Yao-Yi's first part, but just as an example, the point data set that we're using, it's about 35,000 data points, something like that, across the state of Alaska. Those were collected between 1980 and 2024. So there's a 40-year time period in there. We're treating them in this first part just as we're essentially collapsing that and not worrying about the time. But of course, there's time functions. So the physics, I think, really needs to come in when we think about time, because there's fire disturbances in places. So what happens if you change the insulating organic layer and all of a sudden the permafrost thaws deeper? Can we bring in a numerical model of heat transfer and actually predict what would have happened during those time periods, and then start to place these points in time, which we're not doing at all right now. Right now, we just collapse them into a single time point. So that's kind of, I think, I don't know if Yao-Yi has anything to add to that, but that's.
Yeah, no, that is perfect. Yeah, we are working on physics guided spatial prediction and forecasting for different types of sensors. But yeah, in general, the benefit of physics guided machine learning is, compared to the one that I just showed today, which is purely data driven, we have some hypothesis there about, okay, nearby things will have similar quality. But if we understand more about the process of generating different soil types, or the relationships between different soil types at different locations, if there is a simulation, then those type of things can really help improving data-driven approaches, especially when we only have a few observations at very sparse locations.
Can I follow up with one more question? I don't want to take over. So the person who sees on the TV these images, is most of the AI is just kind of correlating one against the other, like oranges and bananas, and based on that we are doing the predictions? And I'll shut up after this.
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Well, when you say covariate, you got two variables, you are correlating two variables, and you come up with a regression equation, and then you're trying to predict. Is that what most of the AIs are doing?
Yeah, it's mostly what they're doing, but it's not really regression. It's some sort of lots of transformations, metrics. You take some input data. You can think of images becoming some two-dimensional matrix or three-dimensional tensor. Then if there are lots of transformations, it will generate one number. And that lots of transformation is what people call parameters. So now you can see things like large language model will have billions of parameters, lots of GPU computations. And all this training is just learning how to tune all these parameters so that when it sees certain types of input, it will be able to generate something. So like large language model are just predicting one word after another.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Nice presentation.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So I was wondering what then in this analysis is the best or the most important for you to get the prediction? So what's the most important driving factor out in the landscape to predict permafrost? And then secondly, how sparse is too sparse? At what point do you have to
Yeah, so I'll start from this first question. So what we tried before is we removed DEM and we just use satellite imagery for prediction. And for that binary classification, the result will look very similar to satellite imagery. So I cannot really say which one is the most important part. But they are all very important. But one thing that we know is they're important in different ways in different locations. And that's one important factor that we are capturing. So there is no fixed weights that we can use to combine all these modalities. What was the second question?
Second part was, so, you're dealing with, sparse data set.
Oh, okay.
Talked earlier about bias. I sort of missed the point of how this approach solves that problem. So how sparse is too sparse, I guess?
Right. So this approach does not entirely solve that problem, but here is one thing that's important, this query location input. The model actually look at the latitude, longitude, and generate some representation to represent the location. And then for every new location, if we don't have an observation, the model will be able to learn a transformation of all these encoders, image functions, to take that and generate an embedding so that if the locations are close in space, they will have similar embeddings. So that's a very, very fundamentally, that's how it would work to handle the locations that do not have observations. But it's actually go beyond that by considering the distances between locations and how much it should be able to generate that, use that implicit image function to do this like super resolution type of work. Yes.
Yeah, and I was just gonna add, I guess, two things is I agree with everything Yao-Yi said. The interesting thing about doing this in Alaska is that vegetation and soils are still fairly tightly correlated because we haven't completely transformed the landscape like we have. So, people that do digital soil mapping or any sort of machine learning modeling work in Iowa or Minnesota, the satellite imagery is not always very helpful when we're talking about predicting deeper soil properties because we're predicting on ag fields and then wetlands. in Alaska, because so much of the landscape is still fairly intact, the soils and vegetation are really tightly correlated. And I think that's why, like you said, you know, the satellite imagery is actually pretty good for predicting some of these things because you're looking at the veg and and in fact, the soil survey folks in Alaska do not collect data unless they are not allowed to collect data unless there's also an ecologist collecting plant data with them because everything's so tightly correlated. So that's an advantage of doing that in a place like Alaska. I think there would be a lot more problems with the data sparsity if those things were decoupled a little bit more. And so I think that helps. And the other thing I was going to say with the data sparsity is a big problem, mostly because of the cost. It's unbelievable how much. There was a field campaign in 2024 that USDA did as part of a project in northern Alaska, and for 3 weeks of data collection, helicopter time, the only way they could get it, I mean, it was $250,000 to, you know, just for 3 weeks of data collection. And so it becomes a problem where, especially with now changes to federal staffing and funding, the likelihood of increasing the gap, increasing data in the gaps is pretty low.
Would you be able to use your model to figure out like where it's least confident for its predictions to kind of say like, if there are future campaigns, this is where they should sample?
Yeah, we do have that. The model does generate a confidence level or a probability of finding something. And that would be a useful indicator. And we think comparing the result here with random forest actually also give us some good indications on where we should look at by comparing across models to get their performance as well. Yeah. So.
Yeah, my first question is, what is the spatial resolution of your ground truth data? And secondly, what are the limitations or uncertainty of uniform resolution when we move from 5x5 to 10x10 or 80x80 to 10x10? Does it affect pixel value?
Yeah, okay, that's a very good question. So the first question, these are field survey data, so it's point data. I don't think there is a resolution. For the second problem, it's actually a very, very good question, because when we start to take, say, the weather data is 80 kilometer by 80 kilometer spatial resolution, and we generate a 10 meter by 10 meter grid to represent it. When the machine look at it, the machine will say, oh, you're telling me all this grid has the same value, right? But it's actually not. It's actually because it's from a more coarse resolution. So in this work, we did not deal with that problem, but there's something that we could do there is to use like adding an extra channel to tell the model that the original spatial resolution is this. So if you see similar values, that's not because they are all the same in this larger area. It's because the original spatial scale was large. Does it make sense?
The pixel value would be same, like for.
Yeah, the pixel value will be the same.
There's another question online, or several questions, so I'll pick a couple of the questions. Let's see, which of these models is likely to suffer from overfitting? Or is overfitting an issue with these models?
I think the main issue here, overfitting, if we choose our training and testing validation data, well, we are okay with overfitting. Like one of the setting that you see is spatial clustering or spatial holdout. So that actually help us to improve to validate model generalization. So I don't see overfitting as a huge problem. I think that class imbalance is a big problem. That you could say that the model overfit into the most common class, but that's something that's posing challenge.
They're also wondering which of these models would you recommend then for spatial modeling?
Of course, MiSo model. It's open source.
Do you have any concerns about out of sample prediction?
Yeah,
for Alaska, I mean, with such sparse data, how much of a concern is that?
very concerned. So I think for any machine learning product, after this step, I think the next step, the evaluation and a complete understanding on the bias and uncertainty would be very important. So there are a couple ways that we might be able to generate uncertainty scores, but it really depends on how people would be able to use this. So if the prediction location is close to an observation, we need to quantify what does it mean by close. But if it's close, I'm pretty confident with the prediction result. But if it's far away and the environment looks very different, then that would be a concern. But similarly, we need to work with Nick, soil scientist, to be able to figure out what does it mean it looks very different. But all these embeddings can actually tell us what do the model think two locations are very different, because this embedding actually hopefully capture everything the model think it's very important for predicting soil property. So if we just compare the embeddings between grids, it will give us some idea about what are the environmental settings that the model think it's similar or dissimilar, and that would be a good indicator as well.
Another advantage we have is that so far all of these runs have been with the first version of this point data set, which again, I can't remember the exact number, 30 to 35,000 points or something. We have an additional 10 to 15,000 points that we've been curating over the last year or so that actually are not in this point data set. And so we'll be able to do some additional runs and validations with, it's not completely independent because they were collected as part of the same projects, but they're new points and filling some of the gaps. So there will be an opportunity to kind of check some of those things that we can.
Yes.
So how much time it takes to generate this machine learning model?
Oh, this one takes, I think, depends on the machine we use, but it will not take more than a couple of days. Depends on the GPU resources we have. One advantage here is we use the pre-trained model, the GeoFoundation model, so we don't have to train that from scratch.
Yeah, my question is about the cross-validation approach. I observed that the random cross-validation performed better for both the random forest and then the MiSo. It's compared to the spatial cross-validation approach, right?
Yes.
Okay, so which of the models likely to suffer from overfitting in that instance? And for spatial modeling, which one would you recommend?
For spatial modeling, which one I would recommend really depends on the type the thing that you want to predict. I generally would recommend random forest as your baseline method, but use more advanced methods. Okay, not advanced, use more methods that would be able to capture spatial dependencies for your final product, which is like MiSo. I don't think there is an overfitting problem. I do think there is a spatial autocorrelation problem for better or worse. In this case, that's why you see the random case when the spatial autocorrelation happens, it actually gives you better result. And 1 kilometer, 10 kilometer actually shows that the model suffers a bit from generalizing to far away places, but that's expected. I wouldn't read too much into the accuracy improvement in random forest for those two spatial holdout, because that could be from the imbalanced 0 and 1 result. Because you can imagine that in a case that 99% is 0, and a model will just predict 0, it will have 99% accuracy. So there's a lot of we still need to do to understand the result. So this is first study. No questions?
Let's give him a hand. Thank you.
Thank you.